Okay, so up next, it's about trends and predictions in cybersecurity, zero trust architectural adaptability into organizations. The world has changed, and we have changed our interactions with each other and with devices. The enterprise no longer has control over a closed network. The COVID-19 pandemic has shifted people from working in offices to working remotely. Businesses have increased their use of cloud platforms, supporting a variety of devices and networks. We don't know where the threats are going to stop. So in this session, we discuss why zero trust should be at the center stage of an organization's cybersecurity strategy and its adaptability into organizations. Chairing this session is Vinayak Godse, CEO of DSCI. Let's hear it for our moderator, please. Joining us on this panel is Vishal Gautam, Senior Director, Engineering and Site Managing Director at Zscaler. Kamal Kumar, Director of Engineering at Akamai. And Navaneethan M, Chief Information Security Officer and IT Head at Groww. All the best, and we hand this over to our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction as well. So in this session, we have Navaneethan, who is a user of technology, right? And working with the Groww and one of the growing financial sector company in the India, and they have been doing quite significant work in the area of technology, especially in financial technology. And we would like to understand user perspective, but we also have a couple of leading providers, technology providers in this field, Akamai and also Zscaler, to understand and unveil this particular subject in a much detailed technology level, and also from the various different perspective as well, because they are not only serving Indian client but the global client as well in different industry sectors as well. So because we have really short of time, so I'd like to come to Navaneethan, like to help us understand why there is a need of zero trust and why that is becoming very important concept from now and going forward for the cybersecurity base.
Amazing. Thanks, Vinayak. Thank you so much for having me here. It's my pleasure in sharing the stage with all the leaders. Of course, now this terminology is evolving in the bigger way, but it's not. It's a new to the world, right? If you take it, that's what we were talking. If you take it 20 years before itself, if you're taking the backup, we want to ensure that the backup is happened or not. Yeah. Really, we wanted to have a sampling test, because it should not be like assume that the backup script is started. After 6 hours, so backup is done. It's not the case. Really, we want to ensure that the backup has really happened or not. The same way, we wanted to ensure that things are, how it is connected. When compared to earlier we have an environment as absolutely a purely typical data center driven organization. We have a dedicated data driven organization and dedicated data centers. If you want to get into the data centers where we have a multiple level of access control to move ahead. So data is very secure. If you want to bring any server itself, where we take multiple months to bring the servers. Now the environment is so dynamic. If you let us take any fintech, maybe let's take in our organization itself, and to deliver the app where we have a close to 70 to 60 applications builder, it's inbuilt with us actually. So they are providing services. So really we are not sure who's bringing, who's pulling the data across the organization. There is a multiple stakeholders involved a lot, and lot of cloud environment increased, and a lot of API it's helping and to build the product just like that, in terms of the day one and day two. It doesn't fit just I can pull out. So that's a bit the complexity of environment. It is so huge. So really we are not sure who's holding what kind of data. It's one stretch in any of the organization. It's very difficult to tell that, how many organization is part of your entity and who are all holding what kind of data. That's very difficult. And second point is, moreover, just we got into that, the API and then SaaS-based model. Because really it's not only helping, right? We also wanted to give the data, process, and then get back to give the final results on them. That's the one. And third one is, now of course, after pandemic, the situation has changed. Earlier we have a dedicated ODC for the fintech alone. Now it is not the way. It is absolutely, you can work from the home, work from beach, work from road. Ultimately, you need a connectivity. So really, the segregation of things also absolutely changed. So that's a need of where we want to enforce effective zero trust model.
Yeah, so Vishal, until now network is like a premise, right? And you would provide access to the users on that premise and that particular network basically. So what exactly is changing? And in that changing environment, until now the security was built on a trust model. So you trust somebody, some individual, some system, some equipment and devices basically, and based on the security will be working basically. So now this entire no trust that we as a concept talked about, so against what is happening in the last 2-3 years of times, and now what will happen from now, against that, why this architectural concept is becoming, what exactly is this concept basically?
Sure. So Vinayak, if I may ask one quick question from the audience, how many of you have almost zero awareness of zero trust? You've never heard or heard about this concept? Please raise your hand if you know almost zero about it. So good. So okay, few. How many of you know moderately about it? What is the concept is? Please raise your hand. Okay. How many of you would consider yourself an advanced, meaning who have implemented it, who have kind of good? Okay, so thank you for your response. So at least, so back to you, Vinayak. The question, very valid question, and I would say 3 factors which has driven this need for zero trust architecture. First of all, this is not a new concept. It has been there. The name was not there, but it was there in many different shapes. But the 3 industry trends which we have seen in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, one is the adoption of cloud, where applications have moved from data centers to the cloud. Second, mobility. Folks moving out of office, working from home, working from coffee shops, airport, and mobile phones. And the third is the IoT. So this IoT traffic increasing, which completely is distributed coming from in different sources. So because of this confluence of 3 driving force, the traditional or conventional means of providing security stack, which the organizations typically use, and in fact, even today, majority of organizations are on that platform of architecture, is what we call as a castle and moat architecture, where you have a network, a firewall protected network, which is, let's say, your office or your data center, and anybody who comes into the network is authenticated while entering, and then you are trusted. Now, this model worked when we were all working from the office. Now, with this distributed setting, and also this model worked effectively when the resources that people were accessing were also in the office or within the data center. Now those resources are not in the data center, they are in the cloud. So even if you're working from office, you have to go out to the cloud, to the internet to get what you need. And now with pandemic, nobody is, almost 20% is going to office, everybody else is everywhere. So now if your security infrastructure is in your office or your data center, but your employee is sitting at home, going to internet to AWS, traditional security apparatus would require the traffic to come to the office or the DC, then checks all the things and go to the internet, come back to the office and go back to the home, as opposed to the going from the employee's home directly to the AWS, right? So that's why a new paradigm, new mindset of zero trust architecture is so important.
And so one is the your own borders, right? And under that borders, in the earlier paradigms, once you enter, you are trusted, right? But Kamal, I'd like to understand from you is, so this concept is what? Like, so when we talk about security, we talk about application security, we talk about data security, we talk about network security, we talk about threat and vulnerability management. So where exactly this fit into, or it probably shapes each and every discussion happen, each and every domain that security is now been discussed. So where exactly the zero trust as an approach comes in picture actually?
Thanks, Vinayak, for the opportunity. Yeah, so zero trust, as Vishal mentioned, so it's a concept where never trust and always verify. All right. So, I mean, as I was mentioning about the castle and moat approach, once you have an implicit trust, like you basically trust everyone, and that is a case for disaster. And in terms of where it fits in, like, so there's a recent report with respect to the cost of data breach, which I would like to highlight. So where they, an independent institute called Ponman, which has been there doing independent research for 17 years. So they came out with a report by talking to almost 550 organizations, various set of organizations. And so if you look at the cost of data breach, the average cost of data breach is $4.35 million. And if you look at the industries, it is spread across all industries. And in fact, if you look at some of the critical industries like healthcare is one of the major is a major industry where the average cost of data breach there is almost $9 million, right? And interestingly, in terms of zero trust, the report also says what can zero trust do to these industries, to these different sectors, right? So they have studied, at least from the last 2 years, what is the prevalence of zero trust and what it can minimize. Like, of course, safety is there's not always 100% foolproof, but you can always minimize the impact. So in that sense, they've studied and almost 60% of the organizations or industry have not adopted zero trust, only 40%. And if you look at the critical organizations like healthcare, finance, tech, only 20% have actually adopted the zero trust. But the folks who have actually adopted or actually implemented the zero trust approach, irrespective of the industries, the average cost of data breach without a zero trust being implemented was around $5 million, while the organizations who have implemented zero trust has been $4 million. So they've actually saved around 20% cost for people who have a basic set of zero trust framework implemented. If we look at the mature guys who have done their deployment of zero trust mature technologies, they've in fact saved around 40% of the cost of the average cost of data breach. So in general, like all industries and all sectors need the zero trust.
So Navaneethan, is it only to deal with the access, or because always we talk about zero trust access, right? So is this concept only limited to access and authentication of the user, or any other elements to also come into the picture?
Yeah, absolutely. Even I as Kumar and then Vishal had given the technology infrastructure is changing. Access is one key component, so like just one door, right? And beyond that, it's like 5 key pillars. Just they will be looking from the zero trust model. It's like what are the data it's being accessed. Not just in terms of access, what kind of data it's being accessed also it's matter. And then what kind of applications just you are accessing, that's also it's matter. And in terms of network components, what are the components just you have connected, that also does matter. Yeah. So that's the way ultimately as a holistic approach just they are looking, not as a silos, just access control. Out of 1,000 people, 200 people can access to the so-and-so infrastructure. It doesn't mean like that zero trust is done. Out of this 200, what are the level of access they should have it, what they're being accessed, and what are the orchestration we are making that. That's play a very significant role. If you want to talk about the VPN, we give a VPN to let us take, entire 1,400 people. Out of this 1,000 people, we'll be keep monitoring, saying that like who is accessing what, who is have a privilege to access what level of stuff. Are they restricted to only that? That restriction also, are they using only list or need to know basis, or they are making on the bigger wing? Because I cannot say that like, let us take I am Navaneethan, my credential is compromised. As a name of mine, the people can log into the VPN and then they can access the entire treasure. So even though it is a Navaneethan, there should have a restriction. So that is a contextual where we are, the playing over there.
And do you believe this architectural idea has now competent market solution to implement this, or still evolving, or still you are looking at more things could be coming in this area? Because one of the directives in US basically, which advise organization, it's government directive basically, to have zero trust architecture by 2027. So that means that still there are a lot of things to be done here. So do you think that market solutions are available in this area?
Yeah, you're right actually. I mean, they have mentioned close to 5 years as a journey, right, to start implementing and to get things done. But from the India as well as from our organization standpoint, just we are looking not as a product. We are seeing as architectures. It may be on the people, it may be on process, technology. In fact, on the governance level also, just where we have addressed. Like who has to access on the governance and then what's it? It's very simple, right? We may do the merging and acquisition. We may have a governance meeting. There also, I want to apply the zero trust model. Who should know, who should not know about, the entire deal size and then how you're going to make a move. So it's not only on the technology, just we are making on, across, all the vertical. And another product, I can say that like they may be value additions for any one component. Maybe network, you want to have restrictions, or maybe have a CASP to have a complete holistic control. So that places product will be the one plug. That's it. Like maybe the one product may not be able to sufficient to have a control enforcement. The next very important point you ask is, irrespective of the zero trust architecture, it's like a little bit on the common sense, how effectively you enforce a security control.
Yeah.
We cannot say I have all the controls, tick on PCI, tick on ISO, tick on NIST, SANS. No. Right? How effectively it is yielding results also playing significant role.
So Vishal, I have to ask about the components, right? So which are ready to now being used and leveraged for building this architecture, building this kind of a defense, which is premise of the defense is a zero trust basically. Which are those components which are available as of now, which can be leveraged, and which are those are in the making in the coming future?
Good question, Vinayak. And adding to what you asked, Navaneethan, also about, is it only about access that zero trust is applied? So actually access may be the first thing, policy-based access, but there's a lot more. And component-wise, in fact, all organizations have these, who have a large presence and a distributed presence, have these components in some or other ways. And I'll go over those components, but thing is, what most employees as a consumer or as user, we don't appreciate our IT teams enough. Anybody from IT teams here, IT securities? Kudos to you all. I mean, they make sure systems are working. Nobody really realize what all they're doing because things are always working. To ensure security, they have to ensure the right user is coming in. They have to ensure there is proper authorization. Whatever resource they are going, let's say they're going to cnn.com, they are allowed to go there. So there is a policy is allowed. Then they will, we need to make sure there is no malicious or important documents or information being uploaded, which comes under DLP situation. So first one comes under URL browsing, URL filtering. That itself is products are there for URL filtering. Then comes, any kind of malware is there. So AV scanning, malware scanning, there are products on that. Then comes DLP, data leakage prevention. So you need a product for that. And then you realize most of the internet traffic is going on SSL, 90% of it. Without decrypting SSL, you can't make sense of is there any malware in it. So you need an SSL decryptor, so you buy another product. So it ends up being a organization's IT team needs to have a stack of daisy-chained appliances from different vendors and then have the same replica over multiple data centers.
Yeah.
So with a zero trust approach, especially how Zscaler provides a platform-based approach, we take this stack to the cloud. So now it's not the responsibility of the organization, the customer to have these. They route the traffic and they get the security stack as a service. So I very much believe solutions are there.
But now one question which as we are with you, so I like to ask is, if you're not trusting anybody, right, and there may be some level of challenges with respect to experience that you give it to user basically. So user may not be happy because until now they have been trusted for a particular time, but now every time you have been checking, testing, verifying that user.
Right.
Is it create challenges in terms of providing better user experience when you are implementing security?
Another very good question, Vinayak. We say there are 3 advantages people get when they implement zero trust correctly. First one we say is better user experience. In fact, that's number 1. Number 2 is better security. And third is reduced cost. And these were the words I'm quoting Chris Drumgoole, who was the CIO of GE. GE is one of our early customers. He said, Zscaler provides a security solution which gives better security at lower cost and better user experience. So now why? Because initial analogy, not analogy, but the path I described about if we're working from home, somebody has to use the traditional castle and moat. To go to internet, they have to VPN into the office, go to the internet, response comes back to the office, then comes back to home. So it is like going around here and touching my nose like this, right?
Yeah.
With proper zero trust based architecture, they would go direct with policy based and proper security. It's like touching here. So your latency is much less, you have a better user experience.
So Kamal, from now, right? So we had been talking about this volume of speed of traffic, right? So we already have 1.6 terabit per second network. We are now looking at 5G, and also the cloud is getting better. So from now on, people say that the volume and velocity of the things that we have been doing, application devices are connecting, and the diversity that Vishal talked about. So how do you see the challenges of the upcoming paradigm, right? And where exactly this concept means, and the imperative of this concept for the coming 2-3 years of time?
Right, yeah. So I think as number of users, devices and everything increase, there's definitely a challenge in terms of the scalability and having better latency and getting the data that needs to be accessed by the user to be given as soon as possible, right? And especially with everything moving right from users, devices, the network environment, everything moving, like it's hard to actually fulfill this. So as part of this, at least in terms of we should have the data as close to the user, and the number of what we call as point of presence, right? The number of points of presence that we have as the traffic increases, like we should increase this point of presence and better traffic direction, which can help people to access the data they need and when they need and as close to them as possible.
So,
and I would also like to add in terms of the solution that you had. So in terms of access and in terms of the risk mitigation, like we have two parts. One is what we call as a north-south, where you get access to the system, right? And there's something called east-west, because like no matter how foolproof your security system is, like the threats are going to happen. But once it happens and once it is compromised, how you actually make sure that it is the damage is minimized. So in terms of north to south, we have this access solutions, this identity solutions, multi-factor authentication and all those things. And also, as we talked about URL protection, those things, which basically when you, from your devices, when you go out, like you make sure that you don't get the malware in. But once somehow it gets in, like so we have something called micro segmentation, which basically talks about like how to minimize, like you have agent-based software running in each of the hosts, and you have very granular visibility and policy, which can ensure that, like for example, like nobody randomly or ad hocly can access your financial data, your database, key database service. So these are some of the solutions apart from what Vishal mentioned.
So one more question which I have is in the trusted environment in your own borders, right? So the things that once you start trusting because they are in your border, and that's why the things that will process to take a security decision would be things that you will process, so data that will process, the context that will process will be very much limited as compared to the user is on internet basically. So we don't know from where it is connecting, whether that user is the same user. So amount of data that you will process to take a security decision, whether the user is the legitimate user. So means the processing that is required to take a decision in zero trust will be quite significantly higher, right? So how do you then solve that? Because until now that process may not be that much, but now you need to process more data for that one. This is question for both of you, and we'll come to Navaneethan as well.
Yeah. See, this is that's what it's happening, right? I mean, if you see 22 years back, my complete engineering projects was in 1.4 MB floppy.
Yeah.
It has 186 pages of my things. It's a 1.4. That's like level of text and then content we had it. Now the one photo size is a 5 MB.
Yeah.
Because that kind of the quality is increased, that kind of the storage also increased. That's a individual person's, it's being generation of data also, it is a huge. So now it is a mixed environment, right? I mean, it's not only if you want to have any news, earlier only the TV channel, newspaper, they can create the content. Now it is not that way. It's like every human is creating a content to, move forward actually. And the next very interesting part, what you ask is, if you take any startups or any industry, while joining the first foremost things, the people ask is whether you allow all the social medias or not, whether you allow this, complete USB stick or not.
Yeah.
And then where we should not have any restrictions of running any other software, right? So we should give a privilege. That's what it is changing. The environment is changing. Earlier, if you see, we restrict USB, we restrict admin access. We don't allow this all the websites whatever. Now the first foremost is Netflix. People without Netflix they don't work. Without admin access they don't work. So that's what it has changed. But now what the technology is evolving is, I provide all the access, but still if you found any other malware, any malicious activity, we should be able to detect or it may be end up prevent. That's what it is coming to the picture.
Yeah, so this detection and prevention and enforcement, right? So that's what I mean. I will come to the audience as well. So the amount of data that you process will be quite significantly high because you have to take a lot of context, lot of things needs to be taken care of to take that decision, right? So this question to both of you, I think
Right.
Vishal, you can start.
Maybe I can take it.
Yeah.
For example, like we have a DNS-based protection product, right? So we see almost 1 trillion requests per day in our platform.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a large amount of data, right? But it also it works two ways, right?
Yeah.
While it's large amount of data, you can also derive a lot of intelligence out of it, which can actually be fed into the system to actually make it better. But in terms of the amount of data that you process, like we should have sufficient big data and AI and ML systems which can actually take this data and with as much little information from the user and device. For example, like how you actually find the device posture of the device, right? So you should be able to get minimal information from the device, like what OS it is running, what patch it is running, whether it is running Black Carbon, what version it is running. So we should be able to get as minimal data from the user and device, but we should be able to actually do all this heavy lifting behind the scenes and then feed it back.
Yeah, and this heavy lifting, Vishal, has to be done in a real time, right? So
Vinayak,
how is that possible? Yeah.
Exactly. I'll give one quick analogy. Late 19th century, Thomas Alva Edison time, if everybody imagine, light bulb was just invented, and he was thinking of an idea of a power plant which can power a whole city, and it was DC based power plant, and DC cannot travel too far, so he had to put multiple power plants to just power Chicago. And then came Tesla, and he created AC, and they did no, we'll manufacture electricity in a large plant. Today till we are on that model. So to your question, it's a de facto logical need that such processing can only happen in cloud. It cannot happen at and that's why you need a platform in the cloud which can process SSL traffic. If you can't open up SSL packets, most threats will go, and that requires a lot of processing.
Yeah, and then that has to be happen in a decentralized way, and cloud can allow you to make that happen. So we have another 3-4 minutes to close this session. Is there any question, any observation anybody has in this room? If you don't have it, then probably I will probably continue the discussion here basically. So what we are getting into situation in the way the applications have been built and the networks which are now connecting to so many devices basically. So we are getting into an era where security decision making nowadays is a very intensive to data processing basically, right? And intensive, like, so you have to look at all those contexts and get those contexts and process that and try to find a meaning, and it has to be done in such a way that it is a near zero kind of or near real time kind of a thing basically. How do you really technically, is there a way you promise that with this approach, with this technology capability, you can solve the problem? There's some SLA or some performance can be looked at.
Absolutely. Without SLAs, customers will not buy anything. So we have a very stringent SLAs. We give all our connections, transactions, which is client that we process in our cloud, will 95 percentile of it will take less than 100 milliseconds. So talking 100 milliseconds to do a stack of things, which includes authentication, SSL decryption, DLP, CASB, all of those within that. So that's the SLA we do promise to our client.
I'll come to Navaneethan, I'll come to you at the last. Navaneethan, help me understand this SLA business from the user perspective, right? So what is performance requirement that you usually put on a technology provider? Because at the same time, you know that any security decision that we take requires a lot of things to be taken into consideration. So how does that thinking goes in terms of using these technology capabilities?
No, absolutely. Now this SLA, of course, as rightly tell, SLA also very important. But now we are not looking on the SLA. We want them to be part of our team.
Yeah.
That's a level of technology collaborations where what we are looking, because it's not like earlier, right? If any issues, raise a ticket 4 hours, 8 hours, it's gone. Like any issue, just one WhatsApp call, just done, and then you raise the tickets, whichever things. But just we need a solution to the way we wanted to get it. That's what I mean. It's like people are looking on the buffet, not allocate, right? It should be cooked, go and serve it, and then things will be ready. That's what most of the startups, most of the organizations, including as the individual, we are looking. And coming back to the another questions, now we are going to the performance as a key stuff. Because if you see the competitive world, maybe in fintech or any organization is very competitive, the one of the key performance what we are looking is how soon you serve. Yeah. That's a play very significant. Second one is how, in terms of the user experience, earlier if you go to the any hotel restaurant, we look for only food, but it's not food alone. Now we are looking for how the customer experience, how the ambience. Yeah. So that also coming to the pictures, maybe coming to the the any of the product.
Yeah, so Kamal, just one element I want to bring it here. The edge computing is also becoming important. So entire this architectural idea that we talk about in the context of edge computing, how do you see that is evolving? Because one is the cloud, but also the processing can happen at an edge level as well.
Right, yeah. So specifically if we talk about latency, right? So there's a fundamental difference between a cloud and edge. While cloud is heavy, like it can do a lot of processing and those things, cloud is more not as distributed as the edge, right? So the edge gives you more advantage where you need to be like solve the latency problems, like where you need to closely serve content or look closely like solve these latency problems. I think that's where edge comes. So in terms of latency, like even before the previous systems, like say for example VPN, it also was having latency. Yeah. It's not that the previous systems were not having latency, but with this edge as closer to the customers, that is one of the model where we can actually
so one part is yes, cloud. Without cloud it can't be done, but at the same time edge computing can really help you to do the things, and which can also help you to process things that are decentralized, disaggregated.
Edge is more distributed and probably less powerful than cloud, but it's actually more closer
in a
to
way
the
you
user.
can unburden the
and
cloud, and at the same time promise the latency required for this one as well actually.
And if I may add to that quickly, with going forward next few years, 5G coming in, 100 Gbps connection data, we are going to see far edge and deep edge. So you have latencies going down to 1 to 5 milliseconds of deep edge, which means security stack will need to come to that level because cloud cannot handle that kind of a load. So,
So with this probably we will like to conclude this session because we have very limited time. That's what we can cover part of this one. We try to cover as much as ground as we can. And for that coverage, basically, please join me to give a big hand to the panelists here, Navaneethan, Kamal and Vishal. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Check. Thank you so much, everyone. Can we hear that for them, please? May I request our moderator to please hand over a gift to each of our panelists? That's eco-friendly. This is for you, sir. Thank you so much for moderating the panel for us. Can we hear it again for that amazing discussion?